The
Excuse me.
moment I
I didn't expect to
realized I
see you
was going
here.
to die in that
It is you,
restaurant,
isn't it?
the
David,
candles on the table were still
who is
burning.
this?
They flickered in the draft from the air conditioning, casting long amber shadows across the white tablecloth, and I remember thinking how beautiful they looked, how absurd it was that something so lovely could exist in the same space as the coldest terror I had ever felt in my life. My hands were folded in my lap. My back was straight. My face was composed into the careful, practiced blankness that 26 years of being Park Soo-yeon's daughter had trained into me like a reflex, like breathing, like survival. But underneath the table, my fingers were pressing so hard into my own thighs that I could feel the bruises forming, little crescent moons from my own nails. And I was using that pain the way a drowning person uses a piece of driftwood, not because it saves you, but because it is the only solid thing left to hold. Across from me, Daniel Cho was smiling. Not at me. He was smiling at his phone, the blue light painting his face in the particular shade of arrogance that I had once, God help me, mistaken for confidence. He hadn't looked at me since the appetizers arrived. He was texting someone. I knew who it was. I had always known, even before I knew, the way you know things in your bones before your brain catches up. And every few seconds he would make a small sound of amusement at whatever was on his screen, a private laugh that excluded me as thoroughly as a locked door. My mother was sitting 3 tables away. I could feel her watching. I didn't have to look. 26 years of her gaze had given me the same sensitivity to it that some people have for changes in barometric pressure. A kind of internal weather system, a deep mammalian awareness that the predator was close. She had chosen that table deliberately, positioned herself in my peripheral vision, and she was sitting with Mrs. Kim, her best friend and the woman who had arranged this entire evening, and they were both drinking white wine and pretending not to watch me while watching me with the totality of their focus. This was her plan. This had always been her plan. 3 weeks ago, she had sat down across from me at the kitchen table in the house I had grown up in, the house I had come back to after everything fell apart, and she had told me with the serene confidence of someone announcing the weather that she had spoken to Daniel's mother, and that Daniel was very sorry, and that sometimes young men make mistakes, and that I was 26 years old, and that the biological clock was not a metaphor, and that a good family and a stable future were more important than feelings, and that I needed to stop being so dramatic about what had happened. She said the word, dramatic, the way she always said it, with a particular downward inflection, a verbal pat on the head that transformed every legitimate pain I had ever felt into a character flaw. What happened was that I had come home early from a work trip 7 months ago and found Daniel in our apartment, in our bed, with my best friend Jiyoon. I had stood in the doorway of my own bedroom holding a suitcase and a box of Paris macarons I had bought at the airport because I thought he would like them. And I had watched the exact moment they both became aware of me, the freeze, the scramble, the sequence of expressions crossing Daniel's face that went from shock to guilt, too. And this was the part that still woke me up at 3 in the morning. A flash of something that looked almost like annoyance, like I was the inconvenience in this situation. I had left the macarons on the kitchen counter. I didn't know why. I just set them down and walked back out, and I drove to a parking lot near a Target I had never been to, and I sat there for 4 hours and I didn't cry, not once, because the thing that was happening inside me was bigger than crying. It was a kind of rearranging. Like an earthquake doesn't cry. It just moves, and afterward the landscape is different, and you learn to live in the new geography. But my mother didn't see it that way. My mother saw a 26-year-old daughter who had moved back into her childhood bedroom and was working from home and not eating enough and turning down every social invitation. And she had decided, with the surgical precision she applied to all problems that were fundamentally about other people's feelings, that the solution was reconciliation, rehabilitation, return. She had scheduled this dinner without telling me it was a date. She had said Mrs. Kim's son was in town and would love to catch up. And before I could process the information that Mrs. Kim's son was Daniel, that Daniel was the person she was referring to as though he were a casual acquaintance, and not the man who had destroyed the only real relationship I had ever trusted myself to build, I was already in the car. She was driving. I didn't have my license because I had never needed one in the city, and my phone battery was at 4%, and she had my purse because she'd offered to hold it when I adjusted my coat. And by the time I understood the full architecture of what was happening, we were already pulling into the valet parking of Aria, the most expensive Korean fusion restaurant in the city. The kind of place that requires reservations 3 months in advance. The kind of place that my mother had chosen specifically because its formality and its expense and its public nature would make a scene impossible. She was a genius. I mean that in the darkest possible way. She was a genius of control. And now here I was. 40 minutes into a dinner I had not agreed to, with a man I had not forgiven, in a dress my mother had suggested I wear because it was elegant, and because she had given it to me, and because wearing it was a form of compliance that she had been counting on, in a restaurant full of people who could see me, and in front of whom I could not fall apart without confirming every fear I had ever had about being the kind of woman who falls apart in public. Daniel looked up from his phone. "You look good," he said. "You've lost weight." He said it the way people say things when they're trying to give a compliment but have forgotten that words have meanings. And I looked at him across the flickering candles, and I thought about the 4 hours in the parking lot and the macarons on the counter and the 7 months of rebuilding myself from materials I wasn't sure were adequate. And I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something with more gravity. "Thank you," I said, because I was my mother's daughter and I had been trained for this. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his phone. And that was when I saw the man at the bar. If you're new here, welcome, and if this story is already hitting somewhere deep, please subscribe to our channel before you read another word. We tell the stories no one else will touch. Now let's go back in. I don't know why I noticed him. The bar at Aria was full. It always was on a Friday night, a long stretch of warm wood and amber light populated by the kind of people who wore clothes that cost more than my rent. But he was different in a way that my brain registered before I could articulate it, the way you register a change in temperature or a sound at the edge of hearing. He was Korean, which wasn't unusual in this restaurant. He was tall, which wasn't unusual at a bar. He was extraordinarily still, which was unusual everywhere. Most people in bars perform a kind of ambient restlessness. They check their phones, they shift on their stools, they look around with the searching quality of people who want to be seen looking. He wasn't doing any of that. He was sitting with a glass of something dark in front of him, and he was looking straight ahead at the bottles behind the bar. And his stillness was the particular kind that doesn't come from relaxation, but from absolute, trained control. The stillness of someone who has learned to be very careful about what they reveal. He was wearing a black suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have always had expensive things, not showing off, just existing at a different quality of existence. His hair was dark and slightly long, pushed back from his face. He had the kind of jawline that people write poems about, and the kind of eyes, when he briefly turned his head, that made you feel like being looked at by them was either a great honor or a serious warning, and you couldn't be sure which. I looked away. I looked back at Daniel, who was still on his phone. I looked at my mother, 3 tables away, who gave me a microscopic nod that meant behave, that meant try, that meant you owe me this. I picked up my wine glass and drank most of it in one long swallow. Easy, Daniel said, without looking up, in the exact tone he had used when we were together to indicate that I was doing something he found mildly embarrassing. This is a nice place. I set the glass down. I looked at the candles. I thought about the parking lot. I thought about my childhood bedroom with its single window that faced the neighbor's fence, and the way I had lain in that bed for 3 weeks after everything happened, staring at the ceiling, cataloging the ways I had made myself smaller for the people I loved. For Daniel, who liked me quieter. For Gion, who liked me less successful. For my mother, who liked me compliant. I had made myself a Russian nesting doll of concessions, and at the center, where the solid little figure was supposed to be, I had found almost nothing. I'd like to go home, I said. Daniel looked up. What? I'd like to go home, I said again, and my voice was steadier than I expected, which surprised me. I didn't agree to this dinner, and I don't want to be here, and I think we should, Suyeon, my mother's voice. She had materialized at my shoulder with the silent, sudden efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She put her hand on my shoulder, and her grip was gentle and absolute. You're being rude to Daniel. I'm being honest, I said. Those are sometimes the same thing. She smiled at Daniel. She's just tired. She's been working so hard. You know how she gets. Daniel smiled back, the easy, beautiful smile that had once made my heart do something embarrassing and now made my stomach do something different. Of course, he said. Take your time. You know how she gets, as if I were a weather pattern she had to apologize for, as if my feelings about the destruction of my most intimate relationship were a personality quirk, a recurring inconvenience, a thing to be managed around rather than taken seriously. My mother sat back down. I sat. The second course arrived, and I looked at it, beautifully plated, perfectly portioned, absolutely irrelevant. And I understood for the
Excuse me.
first time
I
in
didn't
my
expect to see
life
you
with
here.
complete
It
clarity
is you, isn't
that
it?
my mother did
David,
not love me the way
who
I
is
needed
this?
to be loved. She loved me the way some people love art, as an extension of themselves, as a reflection of their taste and their choices and their social standing, as something to be displayed and managed and occasionally restored when the frame got damaged, but never, not once, as something that had its own interiority, its own weather, its own experience of the world that existed independently of how it reflected on her. I had known this. I had not known this. The way you know things. I pressed my fork into the food and did not eat any of it and thought about what it would take to stand up and walk out of this restaurant. And the answer I kept arriving at was that I could do it. Physically, there was nothing stopping me, but that the cost, my mother's silence, which was worse than her anger, the scene, the drive home in a car I hadn't driven with a mother who would not speak. The cost felt, in that moment, larger than I could pay. I was trapped. And the specific cruelty of the trap was that it was made entirely of things that looked like love. That was when the man from the bar stood up. He crossed the restaurant with the particular kind of walk that parts crowds, not aggressive, not hurried, but with an absolute certainty about the space he occupied that caused people to move without quite knowing why. I watched him because I had nowhere else to look, because my dinner companion was on his phone and my mother was 3 tables away conducting surveillance, and the food in front of me was becoming less and less real. And so I watched this man walk toward me, and I thought, distantly, that he was very beautiful in the cold, architectural way of something built for a purpose you don't fully understand. He stopped at our table. Daniel looked up. The man looked at me. "Hannah," he said. I stared at him. "I thought that was you," he said, and his voice was low and even, accented with something I couldn't immediately place, and he was looking at me with an expression of warm recognition that was so entirely convincing that, for one bewildering moment, I actually searched my memory for how I might know him. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say hello." I opened my mouth. No sound came out. "Do you two know each other?" Daniel asked, and there was something in his voice, a new alertness, a recalibration. Because this man was the kind of man whose presence changed the temperature of rooms. And Daniel had the social intelligence of someone who understood hierarchies even when he didn't understand people. "We do," the man said, and he was still looking at me, and his eyes were doing something, a very small, very deliberate thing, a fraction of a downward movement, a microscopic signal, and I understood suddenly, with the clarity of someone who has been drowning and just felt a hand, that he was asking me a question, that he was offering something, that the next few seconds were mine to decide. I had never seen this man before in my life. "Yes," I said. "Yes, we do." The man smiled. It transformed his face in a way that was almost startling, not because it made him softer, exactly, but because it made him human in a way the stillness at the bar hadn't. "It's been too long," he said, and he pulled out the empty chair beside me. There were 4 seats at the table, set for my mother's optimistic vision of a cozy double dinner, and sat down with the ease of someone who has never in his life needed permission for anything. Daniel was staring. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I don't think we've met. I'm Daniel Cho." The man looked at Daniel the way a mountain looks at weather. "Min Yi-won," he said. He did not extend his hand. He did not elaborate. He simply said his name and then turned back to me as though Daniel were a minor geographical feature he had noted and filed away. And I watched Daniel Cho, charming, beautiful, arrogant Daniel Cho, who had never in our 2 years together once made me feel like the most important person in a room, experience for the first time in what I suspected was his entire life the specific social annihilation of being made to feel like furniture. "Hana," Yi-won said, "you look exactly the same." "You don't," I said, because my mouth was moving on some instinct that had bypassed my conscious mind entirely, and then I heard myself and nearly choked. "I mean, you look older," he said, and he smiled again, smaller this time, private, and I felt the strangest sensation, like being handed a rope in the dark. "That's fair. How do you two know each other?" Daniel asked again, because he was the kind of man who asked questions until he received an answer that satisfied him, and also because he could feel the solid ground of his assumptions shifting under his feet, and he didn't like it. Yi-won turned to look at Daniel with the kind of measured consideration that made the looking feel like a judgment. "Old friends," he said simply. And then, as though the conversation were concluded, "Are you enjoying your dinner?" It was masterful. In 4 words, he had answered Daniel's question with insufficient detail, declined to provide more, and redirected with a social pleasantry that made a follow-up nearly impossible without being rude. I watched Daniel process this and watched him arrive at the conclusion that the game he was playing, the game of dominance through information, of establishing hierarchy through connection, had just encountered a player several levels above him. "It's good," Daniel said. "Good." Yi-won picked up the wine menu. He examined it with the same unhurried attention he seemed to bring to everything. He flagged a passing waiter. "The 2018 Burgundy, please, for the table." He glanced at me. "Unless you'd prefer something else." "That's perfect," I managed. "Then we're set," he said, and smiled at the waiter, and the waiter, who had not once that evening smiled at me, smiled back with the reflexive deference of someone who recognizes a certain kind of person and responds accordingly. I became aware that my mother had noticed. I could feel it, that barometric shift, that predator awareness, and I kept my eyes on the table because I needed 30 more seconds to understand what was happening before I could manage her reaction to it. Who was this man? Why had he intervened? What did he want? And underneath those questions, quieter and more complicated, did it matter? Because he had sat down beside me and the quality of the air at this table had changed completely, and for the first time all evening I was not holding my breath. Before we go any further, if this story is reaching something inside you, please hit that subscribe button. Drop your name and your city in the comments below. We want to know where in the world you're watching from. Now, back to Arya, back to that table. Back to the moment everything changed. My mother came over. Of course she did. She was at our table within 90 seconds of Yi-won sitting down, which was impressive even by her standards. And she brought Mrs. Kim with her, which told me she had calculated that 2 mothers presenting a unified social front would be more difficult to resist than one. She stood behind my chair, her preferred position when she wanted to maintain authority over me without appearing to, and she looked at Yi Won with the expression she used for people whose social class she was in the process of determining. "I don't believe we've met," she said. "I'm Park Soo-yeon, Hana's mother." Hana. She called me Hana. That was my name, my real name, the name she had given me, Park Hana. But she almost never used it in social situations, where she preferred to use diminutives that communicated our relationship and her ownership of it simultaneously. The fact that she used my full name meant she was performing, projecting an image of reasonable warmth for a stranger's benefit, which meant she had already decided this stranger mattered. "Min Yi Won," he said. He stood. The courtesy of the gesture and the physical reality of his height seemed to momentarily recalibrate my mother's approach. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Park. How do you know my daughter?" "Old friends," he said, with the same tranquil finality he had used with Daniel, and something in the way he said it, the complete absence of elaboration, the implicit suggestion that the question had been answered and more information would not be forthcoming, caused my mother to shift tactics. "Well," she said, in the bright, accommodating voice she used when she was regrouping, "you're very welcome to join us. We were just— I know what you were doing," Yi Won said. The table went very quiet. He said it without hostility, without accusation. In the same even tone he'd used for everything else, but with a directness that cut through the social fabric of the evening like a blade through tissue paper. He was looking at my mother, and his expression was almost polite, and the words landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water. My mother blinked. It was the only indication she gave of being caught. "Excuse me, you arranged a dinner for your daughter with a man she doesn't want to see," he said. "I understand the intention, but I don't think Hana would like to continue the evening this way." He looked at me. "Would you?" I thought about the parking lot. I thought about the bedroom. I thought about the macarons on the counter, and the 3 weeks staring at the ceiling and the 26 years of learning to make my feelings small enough to fit inside the space other people allocated for them. I thought about the word dramatic with its particular downward inflection and what it had cost me over a lifetime to accept that word as a fair description of myself. "No," I said, "I wouldn't." My mother's face did something complicated. I had seen every expression she was capable of, but this particular combination, surprise and anger and a social awareness that was trying to override both, was new, and it was, God help me, a little satisfying. "Hana," she said, "we're in the middle of dinner." "She can leave whenever she chooses," Yi Won said. "She's not obligated to sit through a dinner she didn't agree to attend." "With respect," my mother said, and when she used that phrase it meant the opposite. "This is a family matter." "Then perhaps it should be handled
Excuse
in
me. I
private,"
didn't
he
expect to see you
said.
here.
"Not in a
It is you, isn't
restaurant,
it?
over a
David.
meal she didn't want."
Who is this?
Daniel had not said a single word since my mother arrived. I became aware of this suddenly and turned to look at him, and what I found was an expression I had never seen on his face before, a particular stillness, a watchfulness, the face of someone who is trying to accurately assess a situation before he decides what it costs him. He was looking at Yi Won the way you look at something that might be dangerous, not afraid exactly, calculating. "Who are you?" Daniel said. "I mean actually, who are you to her?" Yi Won looked at him. one of those long, measured looks that contained no particular emotion but somehow communicated volumes. "A friend," he said, "the kind she can count on." "Right," Daniel said, "and you just happened to be at the bar, on the same night, at the same restaurant." "Daniel," my mother started. "No, I'm curious," Daniel said, and his voice had a new edge to it, and I recognized it, the voice he used when he felt challenged, when the dominant narrative of his own superiority was being questioned. "I'm sitting here having dinner with my girlfriend, your ex-girlfriend," I said. It came out very clean, very clear. "We've been broken up for 7 months, Daniel." "Hannah," my mother said. "7 months," I said again, because I wanted to hear it out loud, wanted to give it the air it deserved. "Because I came home and found you in our bed with Gion, my best friend. That's why we're broken up. That's why this dinner was a setup, not a reunion. And you have been on your phone for 40 minutes texting someone who I can only assume is her, and I have been sitting here eating nothing and trying to remember how to breathe, and I'm done." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My mother was very still. Mrs. Kim, who had been hovering at the edge of this conversation with the expression of someone watching a car accident she could not prevent, made a small sound. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. The performance of wounded dignity he was assembling was visible. I could see him building it in real time, but it wasn't landing the way it usually did, because there was a man sitting beside me who was watching him assemble it with the patient, unamused attention of someone who had seen this performance before and did not find it compelling. "I think," Yi-won said, "that Hana would like to leave now." He looked at me. He was asking. "Yes," I said, "I would." He stood. He extended his hand to help me up, which was a formality I hadn't expected and which felt, in the moment, like something I couldn't quite name. Not romance, not rescue, exactly, but a kind of courtesy so complete that it undid something in my chest that had been very tightly wound for a very long time. I took his hand and stood. My mother said my name. She said it in the voice that meant consequences. That meant we would discuss this later. That meant the full weight of her disappointment and her authority would be delivered at a time and place of her choosing. I had heard that voice my entire life, and I had always responded to it, folded, retreated, apologized, adjusted. 26 years of responding. I looked at her. She was my mother. She had held me when I was small and been proud of me when I succeeded and been afraid for me in the dark and had wanted, I believed, in her limited and controlling way, the best for me. All of that was true. All of that coexisted with the other truth, that she had put me in that chair, next to that man, and called it love. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said, and I left. "Stay with me." Because what happens next, who this man actually is going to change everything you thought you understood about this story. Subscribe if you haven't. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been trapped by someone who loves you? Drop your city. We're reading everyone. Outside, the night air hit me like cold water, and I stood on the sidewalk in my elegant dress that my mother had chosen, and I breathed, actually breathed. The first real breath I'd taken in 3 hours, deep into my lungs, the night air of the city tasting like exhaust and possibility. And I became aware that Yi-won was standing beside me, looking at the street with the same patient stillness he had brought to the bar, to the table, to my mother. And I turned to him and said, "I don't know you." "I know," he said. "I've never seen you before in my life." "I know that too." "So why, you looked," he said, "like someone who needed a door." He paused. "I had one." I looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" He reached into his jacket pocket, and I noticed, fleetingly, that 3 men in dark clothing had materialized on the sidewalk around us at a respectful distance, standing with the particular posture of people who are present as protection rather than as company, and he produced a business card, which he held out to me. I took it. I looked at it. It was heavy stock, the kind that costs more per card than most people spend on lunch, and it said in clean type, Min JAE1, and below that a phone number, and below that a word in Korean that I could read but whose full implication took a moment to land. The word was chairnam, which roughly means chairman. "Of what?" I asked. "Several things," he said. I became aware, in the way you become aware of having been in a warm room and stepping into cold, a full-body recalibration, that the 3 men standing at a respectful distance were not assistants. They were protection. They were security, the kind that exists for people whose safety is a professional concern. "Are you?" I started. "Let me put you in a car," he said. "It's late. You shouldn't be out here waiting." "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he said, and it wasn't unkind, and it wasn't the casual dismissal my mother applied to my feelings. He said it the way a doctor states a diagnosis, observationally, factually, without judgment. "You spent the last 3 hours being manipulated by people who should know better. That's not fine. It's survivable, but it's not fine." I stared at him. "A car," he said. "No obligation. You can throw the card away. I'll never see you again if you prefer." "Why did you do this?" I asked. "You don't know me. I don't know you." "Why would you?" "Because," he said, and for the first time that evening his voice shifted, a fraction, barely perceptible, a slight deepening that suggested the controlled surface had something underneath it that was less controlled. "I watched you press your nails into your legs for 40 minutes. And the man across from you didn't notice. And the woman who was supposed to be protecting you was the one who put you there. And he stopped. He seemed to decide something. I didn't like it. I looked at him for a long time. "Okay," I said. "The car." The car that appeared was a black Mercedes, immaculate, with a driver who was clearly not just a driver. Yi-won opened the door himself. I got in. He stood at the open door. "Hana Park," he said, and it was the first time he had used my full name, and I don't know why that undid me the way it did, but it did. It went straight through some armor I had spent 7 months building. "You did nothing wrong tonight. I want you to know that." I pressed my lips together. I would not cry. Not here, not in front of a stranger who had saved me from a dinner, not in the back of a car I hadn't asked for. I was Park Hana, and I had sat in a parking lot for 4 hours and not cried then, and I would not cry now. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. He closed the door. The car pulled away, and I watched him through the rear window, standing on the sidewalk in his black suit with his 3 men around him, and then the car turned a corner and he was gone, and I held the heavy card between my fingers and breathed and breathed and breathed. I didn't call the number. Not the next day. Not the day after. I told myself I didn't want to, which was partially true. I told myself I didn't need to, which was less true. I told myself it was strange and probably not wise to involve myself further with a man whose business card said chairman in Korean and who traveled with security, which was the most rational argument and therefore the one I listened to least. My mother called the next morning as promised. The conversation was, even by our standards, an experience. She had moved through anger and arrived at a kind of disappointed bewilderment that was, in some ways, worse. She said I had embarrassed her. She said I had embarrassed Daniel, who was a good man who had made a mistake, and that I needed to develop the kind of maturity that allowed for forgiveness. She said that the man I had left with, she called him, that man, was not someone she knew anything about, and that it was very irresponsible to leave a restaurant with a stranger, and that she hoped I hadn't done anything foolish. I listened. I listened because she was my mother and I loved her, and because the listening cost me less than the fighting. But something was different. Something had shifted on that sidewalk in that breath of cold night air, and the listening felt different, not like submission, but like a choice. Like I was choosing to hear her rather than being unable not to hear her, and that difference, which sounds small, was enormous. "I'm not getting back together with Daniel," I said when she finished. "Hannah, that's not negotiable, Mom. I love you, but that's not negotiable." She was quiet for a moment. "Who was that man?" She asked. "Someone who helped me," I said. "Helped you do what?" "Remember that I'm allowed to leave." Another silence. "I don't understand you," she said, finally, and her voice had lost some of its steel, had become something softer and more confused, and I understood that this was perhaps more true than anything else she had ever said to me. "I know," I said. "I love you anyway." And then I hung up the phone, and I sat in my childhood bedroom, and I looked at the card, and I thought about a man who had watched me press my nails into my legs for 40 minutes and had decided to do something about it, and I thought, what does someone like that want? And then I thought, maybe that's the wrong question. We're about halfway through this story, and it's about to get a great deal more complicated. Before we go on, subscribe. Hit the bell. You need to be here for what's coming. And drop your name and your city in the comments right now, because I promise you, people from 40 countries are watching this and we want to find each other. Okay, here we go. I called the number on the 14th day. I don't know why the 14th specifically. It wasn't a decision I had been building toward consciously. It was more like, on the 14th day I woke up and the thing that had been preventing me from calling was smaller than the thing that wanted to know, and so I called. He answered on the second ring. "I was wondering," he said without preamble, and I had the disorienting sensation of a man who had been expecting this call, who had been waiting for it with the same patient certainty he had brought to everything else. "You were wondering," I repeated, "when you'd call." "I wasn't sure I would." "I know," he said. "That's partly why I was wondering." I sat down on my bed. "Who are you, Min Yi-won?" "A complicated person," he said. "Are you asking specifically or generally?" "Specifically. What does that card mean? What are you chairman of?" A pause, not hesitation exactly, more like the pause of someone deciding how much of a thing to tell. "A number of companies," he said, "some of them legitimate businesses, real estate, technology, logistics. Some of them," another pause, "less straightforward." "Less straightforward," I said. "I think you understand what I'm indicating without me having to say it more explicitly." I did understand, and the understanding should have ended the call right there. The rational, self-protective response would have been to thank him again, wish him well, and put the card in a drawer and leave it there forever. The world he was describing was a world I knew from movies and from whispered family stories about certain uncles, and it was a world that had rules I didn't know and consequences I couldn't predict. But why did you help me? I asked. Specifically, knowing I might find out what you've just told me and walk away. This pause was different, longer. I could hear, in the background of his end of the call, the faint sounds of an office, the muffled presence of people, the occasional sound of movement, and then the sounds diminished as though he had moved to somewhere more private. My mother, he said, was married to my father for 20 years. He was not a good husband. She stayed because she had 3 children and no money of her own, and because her family told her to stay, and because she was afraid, and because she had been told her whole life that her feelings about her own situation were less important than the family's stability. She died when I was 19. A pause. I've spent my adult life thinking about who she might have been if someone had offered her a door. The silence between us held something fragile. I'm not your mother, I said, eventually. No, he said. But you deserved a door. Most people do. I looked at the window. The neighbor's fence was exactly where it had always been, brown and solid and unremarkable. You're a dangerous person, aren't you? To some people, he said, not to you. How would I know that? You wouldn't, he said. Not yet. That would have to be something you'd have to decide whether to find out. This was, I thought, the most honest sentence anyone had said to me in a long time. Not a promise, not a performance. A choice offered plainly, with its uncertainty intact. Coffee, I said. Somewhere public. Of course, he said, and no security people standing at a respectful distance. A sound that might have been a laugh. I can't promise that, but I can promise they'll be discreet. We met on a Saturday. A coffee shop in the middle of a busy neighborhood, the kind of place with communal tables and too loud music and students with laptops and absolute anonymity. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner that had sight lines to both doors, which told me something, and he was wearing jeans and a sweater, which told me something else, that he could do casual, that he was willing to meet me on ordinary ground. I sat down across from him. We ordered coffee. And then, for the next 3 hours, we talked. I don't know exactly how to describe what it was like to talk to Min Yi-won. It was the directness, I think. He asked questions and meant them. When I answered, he listened with a quality of attention that felt almost physical, like something tangible being offered. He didn't perform interest. He wasn't building towards something, working an angle, positioning himself. He was just there, in the conversation, the way very few people are ever just there. I told him about Daniel. All of it, the coming home, the suitcase, the macarons, the 4 hours in the parking lot. I told him things I hadn't told anyone about the particular quality of the grief, which wasn't about missing Daniel as much as it was about missing the version of myself that had trusted enough to love someone that much. He listened. He didn't say it would be okay. He didn't offer analysis or silver linings. He said, "That's a very hard thing to survive. You survived it," which was exactly the right thing. I asked about him, and he answered carefully, not evasively. but with the precision of someone who has learned that honesty requires selection. He told me he had grown up poor, in a neighborhood in Seoul where the future had a limited number of shapes, and that he had made choices to ensure he would never have that limited future, and that some of those choices were ones he was not proud of and some of them were things he could not undo, but that he had also built things, real things, that employed people and created something other than destruction. "Do you hurt people?" I asked, directly. Because he had been direct with me, and it seemed like the only way to meet that, he considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I've had to protect myself and the people I'm responsible for in ways that involved harm," he said. "I've never hurt someone innocent. I've never hurt someone who wasn't already part of the world I operate in." That's a careful answer. It's an honest answer, he said. A reassuring one would be cleaner but less true. I drank my coffee. I looked at him. "You're strange," I said. "Very," he agreed. "I should tell you that nothing happened that day. No dramatic declarations, no sudden reversals of everything I'd said about staying away from complicated men." We finished our coffee, and he walked me to the corner, and we stood there for a moment in the easy afternoon light, and he said he hoped I would call again, and I said I might, and we went our separate ways. But something had shifted. Something in the geography had changed, and I drove home. I had borrowed my mother's car, an irony I noted, and I sat with it. And what I felt was not the careful, small feeling I was used to protecting myself with, but something larger and less managed, something that felt like the beginning of a different version of my life. Over the next 2 months, we saw each other 6 more times, always public, always careful. He was patient in a way that had nothing passive about it, an active patience, deliberate, like he was choosing it repeatedly rather than simply existing in it. He asked about my work. I was a UX designer for a mid-sized tech company with genuine curiosity and learned things about it, and remembered the details, and asked follow-up questions the next time. He told me, slowly and in pieces, more about his world, not to impress me, but because I asked and he had decided to answer. I told my mother I was seeing someone. I did not tell her who. She asked questions, and I answered them gently and incompletely, because I was still learning the new territory of being my own person with my mother, and I didn't want to fight, and also because I knew that Min Yi-won and my mother occupying the same informational space would produce a combustion I wasn't ready for. Daniel texted twice. The first time to say he hoped I was doing okay. The second time, 2 weeks later, with an increasingly detailed message that was constructed as an apology but was architected as a reinstatement request. "I've been thinking about us, and I know I made a mistake, and I've changed, and I think we could build something real this time." I read it twice. I felt nothing in the place where I would have once felt something. I typed back, "I wish you well, Daniel," and I meant it. And I put the phone down and went back to the design project I'd been working on, and later that evening Yi-won called and I told him about the text, and he listened and said, "How did it feel?" "Empty," I said, "like reading something in a language I used to speak." "Good," he said, and I could hear the smile in it. I was beginning to think I might be falling in love with him. I held this thought carefully, turned it over, examined it from several angles. It was inconvenient. It was complicated. It was probably unwise by every metric that safety-conscious, sensible people use to measure these things. And it was happening anyway, the way weather happens, the way spring happens after the particular long darkness of a winter you weren't sure would end. Still here? Good, because here's where this story turns. Here's where everything you thought was the story, the dinner, the mother, the ex, the rescue, turns out to be the setup. Drop your city in the comments right now. We have people watching from Seoul to Sao Paulo to South Africa. This story belongs to all of you. Now, pay attention. I had been seeing Yiwon for 2 months when Jiyeon contacted me. Jiyeon, my best friend of 12 years, the woman who had been in my bed with my boyfriend. I had not spoken to her since the night I found them, not because I had decided not to, but because the silence had descended and I had let it stay, and after 7 months it had become its own settled thing, a permanent weather system. She texted from a new number. The message said, "Hannah, I know you don't want to hear from me. I understand if you don't respond. But something has happened and I need to tell you because you deserve to know and because I owe you at least this. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. I told Yiwon about it that evening. He listened. "Do you want to see her?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I think I need to." "Different things," he observed. "I know, I still think I need to." "Then you should," he said. "Whatever she tells you, you'll handle it." I met her at a park. She was thinner and she had dark circles, and she arrived with the careful, tentative movement of someone who has been afraid for a while. She looked like herself and not like herself, the way people do when something has been happening to them. She told me Daniel had been seeing a third person the whole time. Not just Jiyeon, both of us and someone else, a woman named Clara who worked at his company, who had also not known about the others, who had also just found out, who had contacted Jiyeon through social media after comparing notes and putting together the timeline. 3 women, 2 years. A constructed parallel architecture of relationships maintained through compartmentalization and charm, and the particular confidence of a man who believed he would never get caught. I sat on the park bench, and I listened, and I felt not what I expected to feel. Not new devastation. Something almost like relief, which was strange and took me a while to understand, and then I understood it. The story I had told myself, in which Daniel had made one terrible choice that was somehow about my inadequacy, my failure to be enough, was not true. The story was that Daniel was a person who lied, structurally, systematically, because he was the kind of person who needed to lie and was good at it. This was not about me at all. It had never been about me. "I'm sorry," Jiyeon said. "Not just for what I did, for not telling you sooner, for letting you sit with the version of this where it was your fault somehow." She was crying. I wasn't. "He told me things about you, to justify it to himself. That you were cold, that you were never present, that you were more invested in your career than in him. And I knew you. I knew those things weren't true. And I let him tell them to me because I wanted to hear them." I looked at her. 12 years of her, sleepovers in high school and bad college breakups, and the time she drove 4 hours to sit with me when my grandmother died, and the way she laughed, her specific way of laughing that started in her shoulders before it reached her face. I looked at all of that alongside what she was telling me now. "You hurt me," I said. "I know. Both of you, not just him, you. I know. She wasn't making excuses. She was just there in the park in the winter light, holding the full weight of what she'd done. "I don't know if we can be friends again," I said. "I don't know yet. I need time." "I know," she said for the third time. "I just needed you to know the truth." I went home. I sat with what I'd learned. And what I kept coming back to was the dinner at Aria, my mother, so certain she knew what was best, engineering a reconciliation with a man who had been running 3 simultaneous relationships. And I thought about how close I had come to sitting through that dinner and being managed back into something I never should have returned to. I thought about a man at a bar who had watched me for 40 minutes and then stood up. What I didn't know was that Daniel had also recently become aware of Min Yi-won. I don't know exactly how. Perhaps one of the women he'd been dating had mentioned seeing me with him. Perhaps he had done his own investigation. He was the kind of person who did investigations, who needed to know where he stood. However it happened, he had learned who Yi-won was, and the discovery had apparently not sat well with him. I learned this on a Tuesday evening when Yi-won arrived at the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet, and he was not alone. He had his usual security, discreet, positioned correctly, doing their job of being invisible, but he himself was different. Something had shifted in his posture. Not fear, not anything like fear, but an alertness, a focus, like a temperature change in a room. He told me, with the directness he always used, that Daniel had been making inquiries. That Daniel had contacted people in Yi-won's business network. Apparently, he had connections through his work, some financial sector contacts who overlapped with certain of Yi-won's less legitimate operations, and that the nature of the inquiries was not friendly. He didn't tell me everything. I understood that. There were things in his world that he protected me from not through condescension, but through a genuine assessment of what I needed to know versus what would only add fear without adding utility. "What does that mean for you?" I asked. "I've handled more complicated problems," he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at me. "Nothing will happen to me, I promise you that." "What about me?" "Nothing will happen to you either," he said, and in this his voice changed. That controlled quality became something harder and more complete, an absolute statement rather than a reassurance. I would not allow it. "Daniel wouldn't," I started, and then stopped, because the honest truth was that I didn't know what Daniel would or wouldn't do, because the Daniel I had been learning about over the past several weeks was a different person from the one I had believed I knew, and the new version was capable of things the old version had concealed. "He's been embarrassed," Yi-won said. "In his mind, I humiliated him in a restaurant. I took something he considered his. I'm not something I know that." "You know that, he doesn't." A pause. "He's the kind of man who responds to perceived humiliation. I've dealt with this kind of man before." "What are you going to do?" He considered the question. "First, I'm going to ask you something." I waited. "How do you feel about knowing the full truth of what Daniel is, of what he did, not just to you but to Ji-yeon, to Clara, the full picture?" "I know the full picture," I said. "Ji-yeon told me." "There's more," he said carefully, "that you may not know. That involves money as well as infidelity. He's been taking certain liberties with financial situations that overlap with mine." I stared at him. "He's been stealing?" From people who can pursue consequences, Yi Wen said, which I intend to do. But I wanted your knowledge, not your permission. I don't need your permission. I wanted you to know because you deserve to understand the full shape of the man you were almost reconciled to. The full shape of the man I was almost reconciled to. The man my mother had sat 3 tables away to supervise me back into. I thought about her certainty, about the dinner and the dress she had picked and the white wine with Mrs. Kim and the microscopic nod that meant behave. I thought about how much she had believed, genuinely believed, that she was doing the right thing, that she was protecting me, that her knowledge of what was good for me superseded my own. Tell me, I said, the full shape. He told me, I need you to stay with me for this part. I need you to hear this. Because what Yi Wen told Hana that afternoon is the part of this story that explains everything. Her mother, the dinner, the 3 years before the dinner, and everything that happens after. Subscribe. Share this with one person right now. One person who needs to hear a story about surviving people who are supposed to love you. Now, here's what he told her. Daniel Cho had been, for the past 2 years, using his financial sector connections to run a small but legally serious scheme that involved misrepresenting investment information to clients. The clients included, among others, several companies in which Yi Wen held indirect interests. This was not accidental. Daniel, it turned out, had specifically targeted those companies. He had known about the connection to Yi Wen through a business contact, and there was some evidence, not conclusive but suggestive, that someone had pointed him in that direction. Someone who wanted to create a problem for Yi Wen. That someone had not yet been identified. But you suspect someone, I said. Yi Wen was quiet. Yi Wen. I have a theory, he said, that I'm not prepared to share until I have more than a theory, because if I'm wrong, the accusation itself does damage. I looked at him. He was looking at the table, and his jaw was set, and in his expression was the particular quality of someone who is sitting with knowledge that is painful and complicated and cannot yet be used. Tell me anyway, I said. Hana, if it's about me, I said, I deserve to know. He looked up. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and they held, in this moment, something that was not quite uncertainty. He didn't do uncertainty in the ordinary way, but something that cared about the outcome of what he was about to say. My theory, he said carefully, is that the person who directed Daniel toward those specific companies was someone who had a reason to want trouble for me. Someone who learned about you and me and understood that a financial scandal involving your ex-boyfriend and my business interests would be damaging. Someone who would rather see you away from me than see what we're becoming. I sat very still. Someone who found out about us, I said slowly. About 2 weeks before the contact was made, he said. How long ago was the contact made? 5 weeks ago. My mother had found out about Yi Wen approximately 5 weeks ago. I had told her I was seeing someone. I had not told her who, but my mother had sources, Mrs. Kim had sources, and the city we lived in, for all its size, had a Korean community that could be small in specific and targeted ways. You don't know it was her, I said. No, he said. I don't. She wouldn't, I started and stopped, because the honest truth was that I was no longer certain what my mother would and wouldn't do. not because she was a bad person, but because she was a person who had convinced herself so thoroughly that her vision of my life was the right one, that she had already demonstrated at Aria that she was capable of engineering situations without my knowledge or consent and calling it love. "She's afraid of me," Yi-won said. "Rationally, I understand why. Someone in my world coming into her daughter's life, I wouldn't want that either if I were her. But if she did this, the method was wrong," I said. "Dangerous." "Yes." I thought about my mother. I thought about the park bench and Ji-yeon's face and the full shape of the man my mother had spent months trying to return me to. I thought about how my mother had sat in a restaurant 3 tables away, conducting surveillance, certain she knew better, certain the future she envisioned for me was superior to the one I might choose for myself. And then I thought about a man who had watched me press my nails into my legs and had stood up and offered me a door. I thought about all the doors I had not been offered in 26 years. "I need to talk to her," I said. "I know. Not about you, about all of it. I know that too." "And if it was her," I said and stopped, because the conditional was too large to complete easily, too complicated. If it was her, then my mother had not only manipulated me into a dinner and spent months trying to return me to a man who had betrayed me, she had also, potentially, attempted to sabotage the first genuinely good thing I had found in a year. If it was her, then the full architecture of her controlling love was darker and more deliberate than I had understood. If it was her, then I needed to be very honest with myself about what that meant for us, for the relationship, for the version of her that I had always, somewhere, been hoping would emerge, the mother who would look at me, see Park Hana, specific and complicated and my own person, rather than Park Soo-yeon's daughter, the role she had assigned me at birth and never revised. "I'll go," I said. "Tomorrow." Yi-won nodded. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, the first time in all the months we had been meeting that he had touched me beyond the formal courtesy of helping me out of a car. And his hand was warm and cert, and I looked at it, and I thought about the parking lot and the bedroom and the macarons and the fence outside my childhood window. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you're going to be okay." "How do you know?" "Because," he said, "I have been watching you handle things. You are remarkably good at surviving. Survival isn't the same as okay." "No," he said, "but it's the beginning." I drove to my mother's house on a Saturday morning. I let myself in with my key, the house I had grown up in, the wallpaper in the hallway that I had looked at so many times I could draw it from memory, the specific smell of her cleaning products, and the Chanel No. 5 she had worn my entire life. She was in the kitchen with coffee, and she looked up when I came in with an expression that was cautious and prepared, because she had been expecting this conversation, probably for weeks. I sat down. She sat across from me. We looked at each other. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." "I always tell you, Mom." The word came out very quiet and very complete. "I need you to tell me the truth." She stopped. Something shifted in her face, a very small shift, a slight dissolution of the prepared expression. She looked, for a moment, like someone who was very tired. "Did you tell anyone about Min Yi-won?" I asked. Specifically to someone who might have a connection to Daniel. Someone who might have given Daniel information about Yi-won's businesses. The silence was its own answer. It lasted 4 seconds, maybe 5, and in those seconds I watched my mother, elegant, controlled, brilliant my mother, fight with herself. I watched the impulse to deny compete with something else, something I had not seen often on her face, and that something else won. "Mrs. Kim's nephew," she said. "He works in finance. I mentioned I didn't tell him to do anything. I just said that you were spending time with someone whose background concerned me, and I asked if he knew anything about him." "And he knew Daniel," I said. "He knew people who knew Daniel, yes. And he told Daniel." A pause. "I don't know exactly what was communicated. I didn't direct. Mom." Again, very quiet. "What did you think would happen?" She was quiet. Her hands were around her coffee cup and she was looking at them, and I watched her struggle with the gap between what she had intended and what had resulted, the way people do when their actions have produced outcomes they hadn't fully imagined but perhaps should have. "I thought," she said slowly, "that if there was something illegal about him, something that came to light, you would have reason to step back. I thought—" She stopped. She tried again. "I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" "From a dangerous man." "The dangerous man," I said, "is the one you drove me to dinner with. Twice. The man you have been trying to put me back with for 7 months, who was running 3 relationships at once, who has been defrauding people, including companies connected to Yi One. Who is Mom, you tried to return me to him, and the man you tried to protect me from is the reason I know what Daniel actually is." She was very still. "He hurt people," I said, "with the financial thing. Real people lost real money. And Yi One is going to deal with it, through legal channels." This was mostly true. The channels Yi One used were adjacent to legal in ways I didn't entirely understand, but chose, in this moment, to simplify, and it's going to come out. And Daniel is going to face consequences. And the person I was almost reconciled to, in a restaurant 3 tables away from you, was that man. "I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask," I said. "You decided. You decided what was good for me without asking me, without trusting me, and when I found something on my own that was actually good, you tried to end it. And you didn't even tell me you were doing it." My mother's eyes were bright. She was not. She never cried in front of me. It was a rule of hers, part of the discipline of being Park Soo-yeon, but she was very close. "I'm your mother," she said. "It's my job to protect you." "I'm 26 years old," I said. "It's your job to trust me." You were heartbroken. You were not eating. You had moved back into your childhood bedroom and you were barely leaving the house. I watched you disappear, Hannah. I watched you become smaller and smaller, and I couldn't— Her voice broke very slightly, and she controlled it. And the control was both familiar and, for the first time, something I saw as what it was. A prison she had built herself, the same bars she had put around me. I couldn't stand it. "So you forced me back toward the thing that broke me," I said. "I forced you back toward what I knew, what I understood. A family I could see, a future I could see. The man I found after you, I don't know him. I don't know his world. I don't know what he is." "He's someone who helped me," I said, for the second time in my life. And now I said the rest of it. "He's someone who looked at me when I couldn't see myself. He's someone who told me the truth about a man you wanted me to stay with. He's someone who, when I was sitting in a restaurant pressing my nails into my legs because I didn't know how to leave, stood up and gave me a way out. That is who he is to me. And I know his world is complicated, and I know there are things about it that are hard, and I know you're afraid. But I'm not asking for your permission, Mom. I'm asking for your trust, for once. The kitchen was very quiet. My mother looked at me. She looked at me in a way she hadn't, perhaps ever, not as a problem to be managed or a future to be secured or a reflection of herself, but as a person. As Park Hana, specific and complicated and 26 years old and sitting at her kitchen table telling her the truth. "I'm sorry," she said, 2 words, small in the air, and yet. "I know," I said. "For the dinner, for Daniel, for," she stopped. "For the other thing, I should not have done it." "No," I said, "you shouldn't have." "Will you," she started and stopped, because my mother did not often ask for things, because asking required vulnerability and vulnerability required trusting the person you were asking, which was a circle she had never quite closed. "Will you give me the chance to do better?" I looked at her for a long time. "Yes," I said, "but you have to actually do it, not just promise it." She nodded, once, carefully. "I'd like to meet him," she said. "Properly, if that's something you'd consider." I thought about it. "Eventually," I said. "When we're ready." She nodded again. And then, because she was my mother, and because underneath everything she was also a person who had been afraid for me in the dark, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, and I let her. Daniel's legal situation became public knowledge within 6 weeks. The details involved securities violations and misrepresentation to investors, and the documentation was thorough and damning, and it was presented to the relevant financial regulatory authorities by way of channels that were legitimate and above reproach, and that Yi-won was nowhere near visibly. 3 of Daniel's clients filed civil suits. His firm let him go. Mrs. Kim called my mother, I heard, with the particular tone of a woman who has to revise her opinion of the person she advocated for, and whatever that conversation was, my mother did not relay it to me in detail. Jiyeon called to tell me about it. She sounded lighter in the way people sound when a secret has been resolved, when the truth they were sitting on has finally settled. "Clara filed first," she said. "Did you know? I didn't know her at all, and I find myself," she laughed softly, "rooting for her. I'm rooting for all of us," I said, and I meant it. "Hana," she stopped, started. "I want you to know that the thing I did, I'm not going to keep apologizing for it if you don't want me to, but I want you to know that I have spent a year understanding what it cost you, not just the relationship, the trust. The way you built something and it turned out the foundations weren't what you thought." "I know," I said. "I was one of the foundations," she said. "That's what I have to live with." I was quiet for a moment. "I'm not ready to be best friends again," I said. "I might not ever get back to exactly what we were, but I don't want to live in the never of it. I want to see if there's a new version." She exhaled. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably," I said, "but I'm choosing it anyway." This is the last part of this story. This is where I need you most present. Put your phone down if you've been scrolling. Come back to these words. This is for everyone who has been managed by someone who loves them. Everyone who learned to make themselves smaller to fit the spaces other people left for them. Everyone who got to a parking lot at the end of their rope and sat there alone and didn't cry. This is for you. Don't go anywhere. On a Sunday evening in early spring, 6 months after the dinner at Aria, I stood in Yi-won's apartment for the first time. He had a penthouse. Of course he did. It was not ostentatious in the way I had expected. none of the performative luxury of someone demonstrating wealth. It was spare and very clean, with high ceilings and large windows that looked out over the city, and it had the particular quality of a space organized around function and silence rather than display. There were books everywhere. I don't know why that surprised me and moved me at the same time, but it did. We had dinner, which he cooked, competently, without fanfare, moving around the kitchen with the same economical certainty he brought to everything. We ate at a table by the window as the city moved below us, and he opened wine, and we talked the way we had learned to talk over those months of coffee shops and careful slow building. Easily, honestly, with the specific comfort of people who have shown each other the harder things and survived it. After dinner, I stood at the window and looked at the city, and he stood beside me, and we were quiet together for a while, which is its own kind of language. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay. When I saw you at that restaurant," he said, "I didn't decide to help you because you reminded me of my mother. That was the reason I gave you because it was true and because it was the reason I could say. But it wasn't the whole reason." I turned to look at him. "I had seen you before," he said. "Not that night, 2 months before. You were in a coffee shop, the one on Fifth, the one with the communal tables, and you were working on something, a design on your laptop, and you stayed there for 4 hours, and the whole time you had this expression." He stopped. "Like someone who was very good at something and knew it and was completely happy to be doing it. Not performing happiness. Actual, private happiness. The kind people have when they think no one is watching." A pause. "I found it," he looked for the word. "I found it extraordinary." I stared at him. "And then 2 months later, I saw you in that restaurant, and you were pressing your nails into your legs, and the expression was completely gone, and I thought," he stopped again. "I thought, that person deserves to have that expression back." I had not cried in the parking lot. I had not cried the morning after the dinner, or when my mother said the wrong things, or in the park with Jiyeon, or in Yi-won's car the first night. I had not cried at the kitchen table with my mother, or when Daniel's name appeared in the financial news, or when I learned the full inventory of his deceptions. I cried now, not dramatically, not the way movies show it, with heaving and spectacle. Just quietly, standing at his window looking at the city, tears that came from somewhere below language, from the place where all the parking lots live, all the hours of sitting with pain that was too big to do anything with except survive. He didn't say anything. He put his arm around my shoulders and I let him, and we stood there with the city spread below us like something that had been waiting, all this time, to be seen from the right height. "I lost that expression," I said, after a while. "For a long time. I know. I don't think I've fully got it back yet. That's okay," he said. "It's coming." I thought about what it meant to be seen. Not the performed version of being seen, the version where someone looks at you and sees the version of you that reflects well on them, that confirms their choices, that fits into the narrative they've built, but actually seen. Your actual shape, your actual complicated interior, the happiness you have when you think no one is watching. I had spent 26 years learning to be the right size for other people. Small enough for my mother's narrative, patient enough for Daniel's comfort, reliable enough for Jiyeon's friendship. I had made myself a very neat, very manageable set of dimensions, and the cost had been the loss of the edges, the actual shape. Yi Won had not asked me to be a particular size. From the first moment, he had just looked at me and waited to see what size I actually was. I want to tell you something too, I said. He waited. I think I love you, I said. I'm not certain yet, but I think so. He was quiet for a moment. That's honest, he said. I thought you'd appreciate it. I do. A pause. I think I love you too. I've been fairly certain for a while. How long? The communal table coffee shop, he said, which was admittedly inconvenient at the time. I laughed. The laugh started in my shoulders, which was Gion's laugh, which I had not thought about in months, and I noted this and felt it and let it be complicated. This is going to be hard sometimes, I said. Your world and mine. Yes. My mother. Yes. The things you can't tell me. Yes. You're very agreeable about all of this. I'm not agreeable. I'm honest, he said. Those are different things, too. I leaned into his side. The city was still there below us, busy and lit and indifferent in the way cities are to the specific human events happening inside them at any given moment. And I thought about the dinner at Aria and the candles on the table and the cold air on the sidewalk and the first breath I had taken and the 14 days before I called the number on the heavy card, and I thought. The story I thought I was in was about Daniel, about betrayal, about survival. The story I was actually in was about learning, very slowly and at great cost, to take up the space I actually occupied, to be the actual size, to accept the doors when they were offered, to offer them, sometimes, to myself. My mother met Yi Won in April. I will not pretend it was easy. She was stiff and watchful, and she asked him questions that were technically polite and actually interrogations, and he answered them with a directness that I watched her recalibrate around, because she had expected defensiveness, and he gave her clarity. And clarity is much harder to work against. When she asked about his work, he told her, with the same careful honesty he had given me, not everything, but enough and nothing false. She asked him at one point when I was in the kitchen and she thought I couldn't hear, "What are your intentions with my daughter?" And he said, "To see her clearly and to be worthy of being seen clearly in return." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very unusual answer," she said. "It's the true one," he said. She didn't become easy about him quickly. She probably never became fully easy about him. There was too much she didn't know, too much she couldn't control, and control was her primary coping mechanism and the thing she and I were still, slowly, learning to negotiate. But she tried. I watched her try, and trying was its own form of love, imperfect and real. We had dinner, the three of us, once a month through the spring and into the summer. The conversations were careful at first and then, gradually, less careful. My mother started asking him questions that weren't interrogations, about Korea, about his childhood, about the books she'd noticed in his apartment when I described it. He asked her, once, what I had been like as a child, and she told him about the expression, too, the private happiness. The way I looked when I was drawing, and I sat between them and felt the strange, layered vertigo of being talked about by people who both, in their different and complicated ways, loved me. She was always like that, my mother said, like she had an entire inner world that she was choosing very carefully who to let into it. That's still true, Yi Won said. "I know," she said, and then, very quietly, "I should have knocked more often instead of just coming in." I didn't say anything, I just held the moment. This is what I know now, on the other side of a year that dismantled me and rebuilt me in a shape I'm still learning. The people who love you are not always the ones who protect you. Sometimes they are the ones who put you in the path of things you need protecting from, because they are operating from their own fear, their own limited vision, their own narrative that has replaced the more complicated truth of you. This is not malice. It is the way love fails when it forgets that the person it loves is separate, entirely, completely, irreducibly separate from the lover. The stranger at the bar was not a coincidence and not a miracle. He was a person who paid attention and paid it again 2 months later and made a choice to act on what he saw. Most of the world does not make that choice. The parking lots are full of people who can see someone pressing their nails into their legs and continue their dinner. Because intervention is costly and complicated, and the default setting of public life is non-interference. He interfered. And I am asking myself ever since how many times I have had the opportunity to offer a door and didn't, because it was awkward, because it was not my business, because I was afraid. I am asking myself what it would cost me, actually cost me, to be the person at the bar. To pay attention, to stand up. I am not my mother, and I am not Daniel, and I am not Gion. But I have been small in ways that hurt other people too, in ways I am still identifying, still mapping. I have been so focused on the damage done to me that I have been slower to account for the damage I have done, and that accounting is ongoing, uncomfortable, and necessary. The man I thought was the story Daniel Cho, with his charm and his infidelity and his parallel lives, turned out to be a minor character. He was a catalyst, not a protagonist. He moved through my story and cost me something real and is now dealing with real consequences, and I do not hate him, which surprises me, but I think the not hating is a byproduct of having understood him. He is a man who was never required to be honest by any relationship in his life, and so he never learned to be, and that is its own kind of tragedy, and it is not mine to carry. The woman who forced me on the date is also not the villain of this story, though she came close. She is a woman who was afraid, who had been taught, as I had been taught, that love is management, that protection is control, that the correct response to fear for someone you love is to arrange the situation until the fear goes away. She is learning, slowly, to unlearn this. So am I. We are learning it together, in the particular complicated way of mothers and daughters who see each other too clearly to pretend and have too much history to start over. Which means they have to go forward, into the messy ongoing middle of things, with all the damage visible and all the love visible too. And the man from the bar is asleep in the other room as I write this, surrounded by his books in his two-spare apartment, with his complicated world and his careful honesty and his still inexhaustible patience. And when I look at him, I think, this is what it is to be seen. Not fully understood. I don't think anyone is fully understood but seen. Noticed. Attended to. Regarded as a person with an interior life that matters. I thought for a long time that finding someone to love me was about becoming the right person. The right size, the right shape, the right temperature. I made myself into so many different right things for so many different people. What it turned out to be was much simpler and much harder. Finding someone who wanted the actual size, whatever that was, and being willing, finally, to be it. I'm Park Hana. I'm 27 years old. I am learning on a daily basis to take up the space I actually occupy. I have that expression back, the one from the communal table coffee shop. The private one, the real one, the one that happens when you are doing something you're good at and you know it and you're completely happy in it and you don't know anyone is watching. I know now that someone was watching. I'm glad he stood up. That's the story. And if you've stayed with me for every word of it, I want you to know that this took something. The stories about manipulation dressed as love, about the parking lots and the nails in the legs and the mothers who can't see us and the strangers who can, these are not small stories. They are the big ones. The ones we carry for years before we put them down. If something in this story sounded like your life, subscribe to this channel. We are building something here. A place for the stories that need to be told, the ones that don't wrap up neatly and don't offer easy villains, the ones about the complicated, costly work of becoming yourself. Drop your name in the comments. Drop your city. Tell us which part of this story hit you. We read every single one, and some of your comments become the seeds of the next story. And speaking of the next story, next week we're telling the story of a woman who discovered at her own wedding that her maid of honor had been seeing the groom for 6 months, and the text that accidentally went to the wrong person that made it impossible to deny. We're calling it, "She Read the Text at the Altar." You don't want to miss it. Set your reminders. We'll see you there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And to everyone who sat in a parking lot alone and didn't cry, you survived it. That was the beginning.